Here, what's going on? This is De Niro with Against the Narrative with my dog Solomon, man. I wanted to bring y'all in today to talk about the positioning of racism in our society and how we not only perceive it, but kind of a bit about how we value or what weight we give it in the current going on in society. So, what I really want to ask today is, do we think that slavery is something, one, that in America was in some form or fashion worse than what other countries experienced? And also, one, in another way, is it something that has affected us in a way that's irreprehensible or that we're not able to overcome for some reason? Um, some would argue because of lingering effects in society, systematic oppression, and other things. But how do we, one, come up with a solution to how we feel about this? Like, what's the next action? And two, how can we acknowledge that there is some recency bias on the weight that we give this situation and how we conversate about it and finding solutions?
Man, all good questions. So I can really tackle to some degree the first two, although the first one very imperfectly. So I am very historically ignorant on slavery as something that human beings do. My extent of knowledge of slavery to I would say it's very much akin to what the average person gets from a public uh, education in America. I have no idea if American slavery was worse than any other form of slavery prior to it, and I also am not knowledgeable on how other countries handled slavery at the same time. Let's say what my history is so bad, 1600s, 1700s, up until the late 1800s. From my understanding, there was, yes, the transatlantic slave trade, but then there was also uh, slaves in Africa, and then there are also many Middle Eastern countries that also enslaved Africans. And so I don't know if it was worse, but perhaps we could kind of assume that it was very, very, very bad, and then focus on the second part of your question, which was related to what to do next or related to assessing the impacts of slavery and the concomitant racism that still is impacting America as a whole, but specifically Black people, and what to do about that. Um, I think we could say that there definitely is an impact. The question is just to what degree, to what specific population. Like, is it every single Black person in America? Is it only specific um, sub demographics within the community? And then, yeah, the next question is what to do next.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context so we can kind of zoom in on exactly what we're looking at. So, what made the transatlantic slave trade different from other slave trades? So, the biggest argument here is what we understand to be, I believe the term is chattel or cattle. It's CATTAL or CHATTEL, slavery. And so, what is this supposed to mean? Is this I really was looking this up today. So it's the concept that in between the Moorish regime in Spain, I can't give you dates, but I can give you the concept. Within the Moorish regime in Spain, and in that process, when the Moors lost control of Spain, the Spanish or the Catholics, as we know them today, came up with a way of thinking that they were somehow grander than this thing, this idea of like divine bloodlines and things of that nature. So, in the midst of the swimming of the Moorish rule falling and the rise of the Spanish Catholicism, there's this idea that the Catholics or those from the Christian faith were not only the chosen people, but they were destined and obligated to not only take up these lands, but subjugate the people on those lands that refuse to accept Jesus. This is what we know to be the Papal Bull. This is the beginning of Christianity. This is the whole concept of what we know to be the Catholic Church today. What did that do? Somewhere along there, between the Catholic Church deciding to do the Papal Bulls and coming up, I have to come up with the exact name. It's something Latin that I can't say. So I don't want to butcher it, but it happened in the flip between the Moorish and what we know to be Spain today. They instituted a policy that basically made them think that they were the divine rulers. And not only were they the divine, but they had the right to all lands because these were Jesus' land. This is Jesus' world. This is God's world. And so what that did for the transatlantic slave trade is it made the slaves that were slaves in the transatlantic slave trade not only just slaves of war, but they were slaves and all the generations after them were slaves. And then we add in the systematic oppression of not being taught to read, all the things that came in with that slavery and how they how they intentionally made sure that people wouldn't be able to recover after slavery. And so this gets to the second part of the question. The first part is what made slavery worse? Well, it was the subjugation of a people based off of their race and in perpetuity. So you couldn't get out of it because you were born free. Like there wasn't a thing. Like you stayed a slave, your family stayed a slave. Now these are things that happened before, but people argue that it was worse than transatlantic slave trade. And so the second part of this is, well, how do we get out of it? Well, the idea here is that what we've seen in the civil rights movement, the whole 40 acre and a mule conversation, that's not receiving it. So we were never really brought back into this society after being in this perpetual slavery. And so these are the two layers that create this argument of, well, one, why, what did we do to deserve that kind of treatment to be subjugated based off of where we were born and how we look? And what justified them to be the ones to institute that punishment? And then afterwards, once we've decided or we've supposed to been free from this, why were the scales never balanced? This is why it remains this way. And I can agree with some of this, but I also think that, like I said, I believe that now with the current state of society that we need to rearrange our positioning on this in order to be able to overcome the limits that are there that can't be undone now because of the time that's been passed. Sorry if that was long.
No, it wasn't. It made sense as far as I could tell. And again, I'm very historically ignorant on slavery. So thank you for schooling me up on some of that stuff there. What I'm more comfortable speaking about is the current cultural, and then I would also say psychological dynamics at play. And you used a term, you called it being brought back into society or something like that.
Mhm.
And so there's this narrative that Black people are on the outskirts of American society today. And what do we mean by that? Well, those who believe in that narrative, I suppose, would point to all kinds of disparities in different domains of society, of American society, such as disparate outcomes in education, in wealth, in health, in political power, and so on and so forth. The tricky part just becomes that one, correlation does not equal causation, and two, whenever you are talking about extremely complicated and complex components, such as, for example, an economic system or an educational system or a health system, there are always multiple factors at play, which is why initially I said that slavery and systemic oppression, we need to take apart that term too, but I'll just keep using it for now. Slavery and systemic oppression do play a factor in those disparities. The question is just to what degree and what are all of the other factors? Because in trying to figure out what to do next, and this is how you solve any complex problem. What you do is you clarify your goal. Like, what do you want? We want African Americans to be brought into society. Okay, what does that mean? What does that look like to be brought into society? You need to be able to measure it. After you set a goal, you then find out all of the factors that are predictive of that goal or are associated with that goal. And you have to weight them, because if you figure out that there are 10 factors, let's say you're trying to lose weight, right? Well, there's your diet, there's fitness, there's your sleep, there's stress, there's all of these different factors that are associated with losing weight, but not all of them are equally weighted. And so then you have to prioritize them. And then after you prioritize them, then you set up strategies and plans to tackle them, right? But maybe I'll pause this rant by saying the first step is clarifying, well, what do we want? What does it mean to be brought into society? Go ahead.
I totally agree, brother. And this is 80% of my conversation that I have with people. It's like, all right, so you're mad. The world sucks. Now what? What's the solution? Like, really, what is the solution? Like, I have that conversation a lot with people. Like, I I would argue that most of the things that people bring up that they would like to be a part of society are things they already have access to and they don't take advantage of. And I think with that, there's an assumption, and this is where I understand the systematic oppression part because there seems to be a lingering effect where people can't allow themselves to see the possibility of what's there for them because of what they understand to be the stereotype of their culture, what limitations have been placed on them and their family. So a lot of people don't even take the chance to try. There's a lot of opportunities that are there. And I don't say that to be as though to speak as if though I'm ignorant about the prejudice that we deal with in this country. And then that's another part of the conversation too. I was seeing this thing that was about, well, what's the difference? Well, black people can't be racist. Okay. But the definition of racist that says that the prejudice plus power is something that was correlated to explain the situation of black Americans. But it doesn't really say that we can't be racist. It's just this terminology within sociology was created to they redefined racism away from prejudice in order to make it something that could stick out. And I just don't understand why there seems to be so much effort to separate us from the rest of society and how we operate and think about things and what we're allowed to participate in and not. That's such an interesting thing. Like you said, we've been pushed to the outside of society in a way to where we don't even feel like we're allowed to be a part of something that we already are. And there's this weird song and dance that we do to try to um fit in or be allowed in. Even the idea of code switching and all of this comes into this concept of like, I want to be a part of this thing that doesn't want me here. And I've never wanted to be there. And I didn't understand people's desire for it.
Did you hear about the recent policy with Tuskegee University, I believe, where they banned bonnets, do-rags, and sleepwear in classroom and professional settings?
Yeah, I have heard that. I thought it was strange. Like, I mean, I understand like you want people to be decent for class, maybe whatever, but at the end of the day, in a college campus, broke them.
So I think this might be associated with what we are talking about here because I heard about this event and then I just read about some comments from different social media sites. So I've not spoken to anyone in real life about this. So again, the thing about social media and the internet, it could make things bigger than it really is. Maybe it's really nothing, but I think it might be useful. You can think of a culture as being a normal distribution of habits, right? So a normal distribution, right? Like you have an average, you have the bell curve, and then you have extremes on the end. And you could think of different cultures, let's say you have black culture, you have white culture, as overlapping bell curves, right? Where at the average, there's a gap here, right? But the distributions overlap greatly. And so
Mhm.
country white people and country black people have similar habits. And in some instances, they might be more similar than a southern black person and a northern black person. And so it's or you could do socioeconomic terms, right? Like like rich white and black people might be more similar in their patterns of habits. This is very broad overgeneralization, right? Than rich black people and poor black people. But still, so we have to keep that in mind, right? Like these cultures and these groups we're speaking about, they aren't monolithic, but we're using shorthands to try to get through the conversation. So with that in mind, and then with the example from Tuskegee, a big part of it deals with, again, what does it mean for Black people, Black culture to be brought into the fold? Does it mean that those normal distributions overlap? Or does it mean that they are still relatively separate, but they both receive the same outcomes in terms of successful aspects of society or successful aspects of life? And again, I haven't brought it up yet, but the reason I brought up the Tuskegee policy change is because we have a habit within the Black community of saying that to be professional or to speak a certain way or to want to learn is acting white. Um, I got that a lot in high school. My wife, she's a dark skinned, beautiful Black woman who got that a lot. Like, she, from her perspective and her family also raised her this way. Like, she, if you think of Black culture as again, the normal distribution, she would be considered on the fringe because most people in our high school, we went to high school together. Most of the Black kids in our high school were very loud, disruptive of class, fighting, and didn't want to go to honors and AP classes. And we would see that, for as her and I were going through high school, when we were in regular classes, they acted a certain way, people acted a certain way. And then when you go to AP classes, you wouldn't see as many Black people and you would see a different kind of culture in that class. So all of that to say, to kind of still narrow in on the question of what exactly does it mean to be brought into the fold? Like, is it conformity or is it to be praised as equally as other cultures for your same patterns of behavior?
And see, that's the problem there. To me, is I believe that what we see in the Black community is that we want to almost, and this is the strange song and dance here, is because, like you said, there's two sides of this, right? I came up as a kid that got told that I talked white. I was always correcting people on grammar. I was annoying and I was weird and I was a nerd for most people's presenses. But at the end of the day, I still participated in a lot of our culture, with whether or not I was accepted or not in their terms or knowledge or not. I just found my own way. And I think what's interesting about this is my issue with this conversation is I don't believe that we need to be integrated any more than we are. I'm on the bed with MLK. He walked us into a burning house. I think we trying to be in people business that's all fucked up, and we don't know it because we just on the outside looking in. So the issue is, for me, is I believe that we're ashamed of our culture and we think other people's culture is better. We just ain't realized that everybody's culture is shit. And we need to figure out how to work together better and be better people. It's not anybody keeping us back at this point. We just never really had the information to be better. And we could argue that that was because of systematic oppression, the lack of knowledge. I do believe that for me coming up as a Southern person, I was always taught not to show that I was too intelligent because it could attract danger. So there is a thing in our community where most of us don't act as smart as we are. Like you said, a lot of people don't want to be in AP class. They don't want to be seen reading or being educated because in the South, especially, a lot of us are taught that that leads to us being targets. So it's like that's where the systematic oppression comes in for me because like I understand why some people lean away from those things, but if we chose, but there's not. I believe there's a less risk for us choosing to adopt a more intelligent version of our culture, and we just still haven't had the courage to do so yet.
It, I agree with most of what you said there. And even Martin Luther King, in one of his books that came out in the 60s, he said that the time to stop focusing on race has come and the time to start focusing on economic disparities has come. So he, in the 60s, felt that things were good enough that now we need to shift targets and focus on helping poor people regardless of their race. And I think part of why that didn't catch hold, well, one, he was assassinated, but two, there's this two, there's this we didn't clarify exactly, again, what success looked like. Like, what did it mean to have justice? You know, we had the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. Um, we had many educational interventions that were attempted, although they didn't work because it's just hard. Like they didn't work because many of the educational interventions that were implemented failed not because of racial issues, but because it's hard to increase educational attainment in children. Like it's just a difficult thing to do. Um, it's not even obvious that you can increase anyone's IQ today with all of the research that we have. And so, and then another thing also, I also think I read this from Dr. King. The only lecture or public event that he was booed at was one of his own events where there was a Black Power group there. And so, from my understanding, the Black Power movement was an offshoot of the civil rights movement, and they were more radical and didn't believe in nonviolence. And they were the first group to boo Dr. King because of some of the things that he was saying, and as far as the integration and as far as nonviolent integration and preparing to shift from the focus of race to a focus on economic disparities. There was one more thing that you pointed out that I wanted to say. So I didn't have the experience of feeling like I would be targeted because I was intelligent, and my wife didn't have that either. Her family definitely put that into her and her two brothers that they had to be disciplined, they had to be intelligent, and they went to school to learn and not to play. And if anyone else is out there trying to play and trying to interrupt your learning, you need to separate yourself from them. But I do think that there's a motif. I don't know if this is where you're going with it, but I do think that there's a motif of other Black people targeting intelligent Black people.
Yeah,
Whether
and
you're,
that's what
if
I'm
you're
also saying.
okay,
Like
okay,
it
okay.
was it wasn't like it wasn't like my parents discouraged. My parents told me to go get an education. But even then though, so peep game. And so this is the subtle interactions that I'm talking about, right? So my parents tell me go get educated, do your thing, right? To this day, if I correct my dad on something, he would tell me he's not stupid. But I'm more educated, and I pretty much can tell what he's doing wrong, and he won't listen to it. Let's take it back to the past. Where did this idea of me not being accepted for being intelligent come from? It was this idea that as I was moving around with people trying to I was a kid that wanted to help. So if I heard you say something wrong, grammar, mispronunciations, things like that, I was like, "Hey, this is how you say that word. This is the correct way to do that. You shouldn't do this. You should do this." So as I became more educated and I seen people doing things that they weren't educated on, I attempted to help them. What was the response? I ain't ask you all that. You think you smart, don't you? I don't care about all that grammar stuff. I don't got to be that. I ain't in school no more. And you see what I'm saying? The adult, and then let's take it to the classmates. When you go in class and you're trying to like, hey, that's not how you say that. You need help with this math problem. You want to do this, you do that. Now, they would accept the help when they were failing, but initially when I came to try to communicate to help would be that it was pushed back on because there's an ego defense to someone that's more intelligent than you. And so a lot of times what would happen is not necessarily a black thing per se, but I noticed that it's more accepted to look down on someone that's intelligent trying to help you as a nerd or being weird as a joking thing than it is to let them help you or hear them out because you don't want to seem as if you don't know what you're talking. And so there's an ego in our community that doesn't allow us to grow as well.
There's a great book called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. That might have been the first book that I ever read in my adult life when I said, I'm going to start reading. And man, it's a popular self help book. But one of the things that I remember from that book is if your goal is to win friends and influence people, don't correct people.
Literally.
Don't correct people. Like they'll be okay. Just let them go. That's been so helpful in my marriage. That's been helpful in my relationships with my boss. Now, you could use some judgment, right? Like if it's a dangerous decision that they're going to make or a dangerous error, then obviously, but if they slip up a word here, they use someone's name or they like a little detail, or they misremember a song. Like what? Because then it kind of gets into this. You mentioned power earlier with racism only being associated with power. Then it can kind of get into this power game where like, okay, did you correct me because you felt like I needed that, or are you trying to show me that you're intelligent? Like, could this conversation have flowed perfectly without you intervening? Would you have understood my point without, because now I think, did you miss everything that I just said because you're pedantically narrowing in on this small detail? Or did you, like, what's going on here? And so, um, all that to say, yeah, I think that's definitely more of a psychological thing that's not germane to the Black community. That's just, I think, how people are. We don't like to be, there's a way to correct people.
I
um,
mean, even if you
and
take it
yeah,
down to the fact of just looking at someone reading a book, how many kids do you know could read a book in school without somebody saying something to them? You
how
see what
many
I'm saying?
kids?
Like,
Yeah, I don't know.
I know, like, and it's not really nothing. And we could argue that this is something that happens in all communities, but I do believe that there is a pushback on a certain level of intelligence or a certain level of ideas. Like you even said with the whole idea of the how people responded to MLK's intentions to change the narrative outside of what some more radical thinkers may think was the direction that the community needed to go.
Yeah, yeah, no, agreed. And it's but kind of coming back to the topic, like that's not necessarily, unless I don't think you're making the case that the aversion to intelligence in the Black community is a systemic oppressive element. We kind of agree that's kind of just something psychological, right?
Yeah, I more so what I'm reaching at is this idea, like we're talking about this solution of what is the solution to this? What's the next step? And I think the next step is mm, making space for people to intellectually communicate about this topic in a way. And I believe that the psychological factor that we're just acknowledging has kept us from being able to proliferate leaders. Whether you talk about that and the idea of a lot of the leaders in our community have been assassinated, that's another conversation. But how do we trying to circle back to the topic of the solution here? To me, it's always been about education and our ability to celebrate and share ideas. And I believe that there is a limitation on the ideas that are allowed to be shared because of our perceptions of how new information works in our
I think the number one solution is personal responsibility.
for sure.
I think that's, with all of this complexity that we can get into and that I would love to spend more time discussing, specifically what is the Black community, and because you can't change something until you've identified it, right? But
Mhm.
with personal responsibility, yes, that's true for anyone in any community, but I think specifically for the Black community, we have to be we have to set our own goals, and we have to be real about what it is that we want, and then we have to learn how to plan. Like you mentioned, there's with AI now, but we really, I don't know, even since 2010 or maybe 2005, the information is there. The books are there. The libraries are there. Now, like everyone else, we have to develop our own ability to sift through all of this information and avoid information overload. But it is there, depending on whatever it is you're trying to do. I want to get in shape. I want to get into college. I want to have a good job. I want to find a wife or a husband and settle down. I want to be an artist. Like, there are steps that you could take immediately that will at least get you in the right sphere of information to then explore. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to own your journey and continue to persevere and to ask the questions and to try things out and to be okay to be different. Um, because uh, that's kind of part and parcel for everyone's journey, I would say. But other than personal responsibility, I think something else that has to be done is really a clarification of what what is Black culture, what is the Black community. But I'll pause there before I dive into it.
Yeah, and I agree with you there because the question becomes, mm, are we being accountable for the things that we have control over, or are we assuming that the system won't allow us to? And for me, it's all about formulating certain ideas. I think one of the biggest things I see is us not really knowing, like you said, what that looks like. What does the solution look like? How do we formulate it? And I'm trying to figure out how to, I guess, position this idea that mm, there's a lot of mm, nuance. So, like for me, honestly, I talk about the black issue because I realize it's a thing, but I'm really more of a human issue person. I think the issue is just easier to solve if we zoom out a little bit and we're able to look at what humans need. I've talked to you about this before, but there seems to be some hindrance on this. And I guess the question I wanted to ask is, do you think, like, well, we can either get into establishing what the actual community is, and or the direction I was kind of thinking about is, do we think that the reparations and the 40 acre and the mule now would make a difference, or is it something else that we need to make that gap seemingly not seem so much like a thing? And that would go into, like you said, us establishing what the community is, what giving that community money would do, and the argument they have, well, other communities have gotten reparations, why not us, and yada yada.
Yeah, absolutely not. It absolutely would not solve.
I agree, but
Yeah,
a lot of people think it
yeah,
would. A lot of people think that's the solution, and I think most people just want to be saved from their issues. They think money is the answer.
right. And again, so this immediately ties into what we're talking about, right? Will reparations solve the problems of the Black community in the Black community pertaining to the Black community in relation to the broader American community? No, like it won't, especially if, like, let's try to exemplify a few, right? So, um, when it comes to STEM majors in America, there is an underrepresentation of Black people in those majors. I think Black people make up 13% of the population. I think across all STEM majors, it's like 4%. Black people make up like 4%.
Glad to be here.
Okay, one of the right, look at us, right? But like, but one of the okay, but now if you look at African American studies, there's an overrepresentation, right? Where it's like 60%. I'm making it. This is an overwhelming overrepresentation, right? Now, those are two different majors. Like, those are two different data points. So I can't exactly quantify and say this empirically true. I'm speculating now that what if a part of the reason that there's an underrepresentation in STEM is that Black people are just, for whatever reason, less interested in those majors, and maybe they're more interested in the humanities. Like, we see all of these. We have this issue where we think that in every domain of existence, the demographic in those domains should match the general population, and that's just absolutely not true. Like, that's not the case anywhere.
I
Right?
agree.
It's not the case in sports, it's not the case in the music industry, it's not the case in negative uh impacts on life. It's just, and that's also the case across the world. So that's not a good marker to see, well, are things correct or are things as they should be, because you can't calculate what they should be, right? Especially if you're taking into account actual differences in culture. And then I'll give you another example. I believe about 70% of children born to Black women are born out of wedlock. I think I said that correctly. Um, and that's greater. That one, of course, that's disproportionately high, and then it's greater compared to the other races. I don't think 40 acres and a mule or $1 million or whatnot given to each household, like, it's not obvious that that's going to fix that problem, right? And again, these are things you have to assume that these are problems, right? There are also greater health uh, risks and detriments that the black community faces compared to other races. Like, are you going to change your eating habits because you have money now? Like, but you can make the no, but like that's one part of it, right? But you can also I can see someone making the argument like, well, they're in a food desert, so that's why they eat poorly. It's like, look, I'm not in a food desert and I eat poorly. Like I don't think that the I don't think that the average person is just the average American is like super disciplined and is super ready to eat properly and also to work out and to manage their stress and to get their sleep. Like that's not the average person. And so they're just to cut off this rant. I think that there are so many issues that Americans have that money won't solve.
I agree, and I think as much as and I think the reason why we lean to, if I just had the money, I'd be better because we don't want to be accountable for this. It's not our bad decision making that's keeping us from being better. Why I don't understand why it's so hard for people to be accountable for. I'm just not doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing. And there and I think what's so interesting about it is that I think being well traveled and being kind of friendly helps you with being a human. Because once you talk to enough people in different situations, you stop believing that everybody is having problems because of something imaginary. No, they're having problems because of themselves, because of the habits they have, the households they come from, and the cultures that they've chosen to adopt. And whether or not they've allowed those things to control every decision they make, or whether or not they think for themselves. Most people are controlled by the environments and cultures they choose and not by their own decisions. And they lack accountability because of that, because they never felt like they had the choice to figure out what they liked and didn't.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And to kind of steel man the other side of the argument, right? We can say that there are life is a chaotic dragon to bring our symbolism back into this. Like your every individual has their own journey that they're going to have to contend with and to say something like, well, the economic system is keeping people down. Well, first of all, there's no the economic system, right? There's so many different dynamics and factors that go into your ability to make money from international affairs to your local jurisdiction to the different entrepreneurs around you and also your own decisions. And so it's like, yes, there are things outside of your control that impact you. Absolutely. There's a book Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke, another one of those first self-help books that I read a while ago, and she analogized life to a poker game. Well, to poker in general, right? You can't control the cards that you are dealt. All you can do is play them as best as you can. But also, poker is not a one-time thing. At least it's not supposed to be, right? For the better players, you play hundreds, maybe thousands of hands across your whole career. And it's not about hitting a home run and making as much money as you can on the singular game. It's about learning how to stay in the game long enough to get better and eventually make money increasingly over time. And it's the same thing in life. Every single day, you're presented with a deck of or a hand of cards and you have to play it to the best of your ability. And you have to maximize on your great hands and you have to mitigate the risk when things aren't going so well for you. And so that I am trying to highlight that as much as we're harping on individual autonomy and responsibility, which I think you can harp on all day and rightly so, there are also elements that are out of your control. And there's also luck. But that still doesn't negate the first factor of your decision making.
So I love the analogy you used there because I'm gonna do the players collective thing with this. All right. So this is my system here, right? So I understand that life is a game and we play it well. Every day, like you said, you get a hand of cards. The hands of cards is your assets, your time, your job, your position, these things that you at this point in our life has kind of been established for it, but you start off with a fresh hand at the beginning. But like you said, every day you get a new hand with new cards and new things that you can play because there's different positioning, things of that nature. So what am I saying here? The idea here is that the accountability falls on you because it's up to you to understand when you have a good hand and when you have a bad hand and how to play it. And you only learn that through playing the hand that you have. So a lot of people lack accountability is because they're mad at having the hand that they have, and there's nobody that's dealing the hand.
There that's good. That's good. There's a there's a an existential term. It's called thrownness. I think the philosopher's name is Heidegger, who created this. And when we experience life, especially when you're young, but as you're an adult, you're reflecting on it, you're thrown into life, right? There's kind of an arbitrariness about your experience and your reality, right? You didn't ask to be your certain race, your sex, to have your certain set of parents, to be born at a certain time, to be born in a certain place, to have your personality, temperament, your IQ, your beauty, your height, your weight, all of these things. You kind of just many of those things I just mentioned, you're just thrown into it. And many people do become nihilistic and cynical, and they struggle with that component, right? It's like, why, especially, and you can imagine, right? Especially if you're thrown into what seems like a never ending abyss of suffering and despair. You can understand it. You can understand why someone would be pissed at it. But there's another great book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor. And while he was reflecting on the years he spent in the concentration camps, he said that the one thing that cannot be taken away from you is your ability to choose your attitude.
Hmm.
And look, not trying to compare slavery to the Holocaust or the gulags. It's like, look, many people go through a lot of suffering. A lot of it is self-inflicted. A lot of it isn't. A lot of it is just, God kind of saying, there, take that. And I'm also reminded of the story of Job. Like, one, as Frankel said, you have to keep in mind that you have the ability to choose your attitude. But then if we want to layer Job into this, we can say, well, maybe your best bet, even when you're dealt the worst hand possible, is to have faith that if you persevere and endure and aim up, then you will manifest some semblance of something better, even if you can't see it. Maybe it's not better for you. Maybe it's better for someone else. Maybe it's better for future generations. You never know what your impact will be, but what's the alternative?
My biggest thing is I always say the universe works in your favor. You had to have faith that the hand that you're dealt is teaching you the lesson to make you strong enough to get to the thing you want in life. So I don't believe so in the idea when I listen to the whole Buddha life is suffering thing, it's this idea that there's an aspect of this reality that is meant for you to suffer to make you what you need to be. And if you can accept that aspect of life, that life is suffering, not because it wants you to suffer, but because it wants you to be better, that perspective allows for you to go through everything with a sense of joy. Not because it's fun, but because you internally believe that no matter whether you like it or not, it serves a purpose for the greater good.
No, that's real. That's real. Okay, we went real philosophical there, but trying to come back to the topic because I do think it's an interesting one. Although you can veer off into all of these pits of complexity, which is why I think the conversations that we are having now probably have been had for the past few decades because it's always a question of, well, what is race? Well, what does it mean to be racist? Is race a social construct? If it's a social construct, does that mean it's not real? Should we just all, like you said, should we all just be the human race and stop using the word black or white or whatever? And what about ethnicity? So it gets really murky, but ignoring all of those things, I do think that there are real psychological and potentially organized sociological interventions or tools that can be leveraged. We already spoke about personal responsibility and choosing, developing the awareness of choosing your own attitude, adopting the attitude that life is suffering, but in some sense to be grateful in spite of your suffering, and about having the faith that if you voluntarily confront the challenges that life has presented to you, that you can glean something useful and valuable from that confrontation. But on the and I think all of those are great, right? On the broader front, now I'm trying to think about what are some potential solutions that organizations like the fraternity, potentially government interventions. I'm not really a fan of government interventions. I'm not going to lie. Like there's a history of the there's a history of the government trying to, particularly starting in the 60s, trying to help African Americans, and it just not going well. If we want to talk about the uh, war on poverty, if you want to talk about sex education in public schools, things just seem not to go well. If you want to talk about the increasing welfare state, doesn't seem to be helping out. But what does help? I mean, you brought up education earlier, like, and when I think education, I would also associate it with motivation, right? There's this there's this group in Albany, Georgia, actually. What is it called? Randall, I think is his first name. Randall something. But I remember watching him a few years back where he was just posting on social media, and he, if I remember correctly, started a summer camp in his neighborhood. He saw that there are a lot of boys out that weren't doing anything for the summer, and he had time, and so he just started, talking to the parents, talking to the families, like, "Hey, you want to get the kids? They can meet in my home. We'll work on cars. I'll teach them how to tie a tie. We'll talk about etiquette. I'll teach them how to cook. All of these things." And it started, from my understanding, as a grassroots enterprise, and now I believe he has a whole charter school. And it's like, oh, that's beautiful, man. Like, I absolutely love that. And I would bet that the organizer, I forget his name, started with those psychological principles in mind. And he said he saw issues around him and said, okay, I think that these kids are the future. And if I want to do something good for the future, that I can start by sacrificing of my own time and energy and money in pouring into these kids who could use some mentorship. So things like that, I think, are amazing.
Definitely. I think that's called, for me, that's leading by example. I see a problem. I understand that I have a solution to it on a scale. Let me try this on a small scale. Let me see how many people I can help. And then as I see and understand the problem more, I can scale up to assist more people. But we have to be willing to do that, you know? And even with me, with the Players Collective, and my whole thing for the Players Collective is I thought working for people sucked. And I wanted to create an environment where I thought working for people would be fun. I don't even want you to work for me. I just want to teach you a way to go make money and build a business where you could work for yourself and you could do it in the industry that you love doing it. That's my solution. My solution is just coming around and telling people like I'm getting further and further from doing things I don't like doing. And the further I get to that, the better I am as an example of how the issue isn't the community or the country, it's your effort and it's your willingness to be in a space that's uncomfortable for a certain amount of time.
Yeah. A lot of this is about delay of gratification too. Like I think that when many people posit a desire for something more, they want it now, or they want it in the next week or the next month. And it's hard to conceptualize a vision of something positive that might take you 3, 4, 5 years to get to. And it's also difficult just practically to modify your life now in the hopes of attaining that dream, if you're also thinking about the real risk that it might never manifest. And a good example is just, again, something fitness related. Like if you wanted to run a marathon, it might take someone 2 years. You set the goal of completing a marathon, right? 26.2 miles. It might take you 2 years to go from never having ran before to being able to complete a marathon. But you have to start tomorrow, right? You have to go out and buy some shoes. You have to buy running gear. You have to create a run route. You have to start tracking. Okay, I'm going to walk a mile for a week, and then I'm going to run a mile for a week, and then I'm going to go up and walk 2 miles or run, walk, whatever. But that takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of consistency. It takes a lot of endurance as well. And I think that that's the case for many things that you go through in life, whether it's at work or your relationships or your family. A lot of this comes down to the pattern of setting the goal and then developing strategies for attaining that goal, and then mapping those strategies onto habits that you can track every single day to see whether or not you're on the right path, and then adjust, accordingly. Um, yeah, we kind of we kind of veered away a little bit from the Black community. Now it's again, it's so difficult, right? Because is there a unique Black problem? Are there problems that are unique to the Black community that aren't germane to other groups, or I don't
So
know.
I think we landed right where we need to, because the last question that we asked before we kind of veered off was, what's the solution? And so I think we're talking about how the solution is formulated on the small level here, right? So I don't know if you remember this, dog. We had linked up at the Battery one day at a cigar bar. We got cigars, we had drinks. When you had that talk with me, I was building the Players Collective then. That conversation that we had was me formulating the ideas to get to where I'm at now. And so for me to get from that conversation to now, for us to be on live, having a conversation in public about some of the same topics that we were talking about then, in a way that we can present it to people to be therapeutic for their situation, what they're doing. To me, that's the solution. How do we get there? Over time, years of time. And what I see in the community now, when you see 19 Keys, when you see Dr. Umar, when you see the Yaqui Awakens of the community, people that are preaching health, people that are preaching financial literacy, whether you talk about all these different people, and we're preaching education. So I believe we're formulating the solution now in small niche groups. And eventually somebody's going to come up with a methodology or a mindset that um frees us from the metaphorical change that we're in mentally and allows us to operate in a way that's more therapeutic as a community. Um, I think that all races are in some form or fashion working on this. And at some point, somebody's going to come up with something that works united for everyone. And that's what we're looking at. People talk about, oh, the 3-5D split, oh, the world is coming to an end. I think we're finding love again. And our ability to find love again is just a song and dance that takes some time, brother. And as much as we would like for it to be something that we could find a solution to fast, we gotta try it and see what works and what doesn't work.
Absolutely. No, I absolutely agree, man. My favorite. I apologize. I bring up so many books this episode for some reason, but maybe the last one I'll bring up. One of my top 5 philosophy books, even though some might consider it kind of rudimentary philosophy, is The Strength to Love by Martin Luther King. It's a compilation of various sermons that he gave on the importance of Christian ethics and his view of how we should conduct ourselves as we interact with our own being extended across time, but also how we should interact with other people. And while I disagreed heavily on a lot of King's political ideas, I thought that his philosophy, which was specifically grounded in Christian religion, was amazing. And it's like, wow, if we could just have that as kind of a blueprint, as a foundational blueprint, and then okay, we all agree on this religious ethical system. Now, how do I make money? Now, how do I find a girlfriend and eventually have a wife. Now, how do I get a job? Those things will come later. That's fine. Those things will come later. But where I see myself in this broader journey is, like you said as well, trying to reformulate the shared narrative, the foundation, whether it's what should be the highest goal that we all orient towards, or whether it's what are our foundational principles and values. The metaphor is the same either way. That's what I'm trying to get at. And one of the reasons that I'm going back to universities, because I think that that's where a lot of these issues maybe not have started, but are exaggerated because there are many people in those institutions who don't have to deal with the real world, who believe that, well, there are no shared values. There is nothing at the top. Everyone can just do whatever they want. All morality is relative. All narratives that orient us and give us our values and help us prioritize our attention are equal. They're all equally valid. It's like, all right, cool. So now I gotta go spend 5 years contending with that, because so many of our young people, of course, young people, yeah, fucking 31, but so many of our so many people in our culture go through the universities and they come away with these ideas because they didn't have anything prior to that. And they come out and then they go become HR representatives or DEI representatives. And, then they control much of what can be said or not said in the workplace, where it seems most people are at now, because a lot of people are very individualistic and atomized. And, it's not obvious that people are meeting up outside of work. And so if most people are meeting up at work, but there you can't really think because you have to don the overly constricted persona of political correctness, then, well, what else is there, right? So it's a little rant, but yeah, that's where I see myself.
No, I think it's an interesting thing, right? Because one thing I've noticed is the rigidity of the conventional university graduate. They feel as though because of their education that the knowledge they have isn't questionable in a sense. And that's scary to me. This certainty of your knowledge is terrifying. I have a degree in software engineering. I I can't say I didn't learn anything, but brother, come on. For me to sit and say I'm an expert in engineering would be a falsity. I could speak more educated about it. I could use better vocabulary to to explain what I'm talking about. But I was drunk most of my college career. Who are we fooling? I was Nick, bro. I barely made it to class. I'm smart enough to have passed. And I'm not saying that my college experience was by no means the typical college experience, because I was on something. I had a ball though. But could we honestly say that the average person with a bachelor's degree is truly educated on a topic in depth? No, brother, we can't. That's why they have masters and PhDs, because they're only giving you a surface level education. You have to get up to the top to even see what the details are that they're making these assumptions from. In mathematics, you don't get into the street of mathematics and calculus and proofs until you're almost a junior or senior in college. We don't even know how our math works, let alone any of the other logic. Let's be honest, we don't. So this idea of some bravado from education is a falsity. Most people aren't nearly enough of a scholar to be that braggadocious. They're just not. And having that level of clarity and honesty is what I think humanity needs. We believe that we know more than what we actually do. And because we believe we know more than what we actually do, we're not able to be inquisitive enough about the solutions that we're offering and what's available to us. And I think that's what we're really talking about when we talk about the community and the Black community, is that not only were we not allowed to be educated in a certain way, but we were not allowed to be educated in a way that we believe that the information that we have now is sufficient and don't really understand the gap there on a community level and what we're missing out on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That certainty of thought as it manifests in the Black community, in my mind, it personally has impacted me when it comes to political thinking. And so I consider myself a conservative. If we use labels, I'll call myself a conservative, right? But whatever, things are always more complicated than the rigidity of the concepts allow. But when in this past presidential election, one of our mutual fraternity brothers that we know, Joe Luck, he and I had a discussion about it, and we just debated like we do a lot. We're good friends. He's a liberal, and I think he's a liberal. And then he posted something on Instagram the day after the election, after we had had our conversation, and he said he tagged me in it, and he's like, "Look, I don't know if you remember that time. What was it? It was the end of 2024 and then 2023. I can't remember, but Thing things were tense. People were like, "How did Trump win again?" Like, it's crazy. Like, my social media feed was I have never seen so many homicidal threats in my life. Like, it's it's crazy, right? Not towards me, but just like, somebody needs to do something about this guy. Like, it's very surreal. But in the comments on Joe's post were so many people like, "What? You're Black and you voted for blah, blah, blah. You're the bros and you voted for Trump. Like, oh, ain't no way. Like, it's crazy." And to me, that was one story, just a small example of that uh, certainty of your thought that this is correct. Um, that I felt like it's something that we need to get past as a human race, also as a community.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting because I've purposely stayed so far away from the political topic. I just think there's too much. I don't like theatrics. I don't like passive aggressive conversations. I don't like trying to make me feel like you care about what I'm doing and what I'm going through. And so when I look at a lot of politicians, I feel like I'm being shoveled rhetoric, a good speech, you know? And it's interesting to me how some people seem to leverage more on what's said in the speech instead of their opinions and views that they have in real time and what they see and what they experience and what they live through. And I'm saying that to say that I believe, mm, like you said, there's a weird space where we feel as though we're entitled to not only be correct about certain things, but to enforce our idea of correctness on others in a way that's so invasive and just so really just inconsiderate, for lack of a better term. It's like, brother, did I even ask you what you had to say about what I had going on? And outside of that, did your decision make a difference? Are you not happy about what you did? So you're so you so like I think we have to, especially when it comes to the voting thing. Like, bro, do what you decided to do. Let everybody do what they wanted to do. So at the end of the day, we know where everybody sits. And when we got to the end of the vote, what do we know? Where everybody sat. And we would argue whatever it is. To me, honestly, what I see in that election is that we seen a country of men that still didn't want to be led by a woman. We could make it about whatever else we wanted to. But to me, that's what I seen. And the correctness or not of that is not really relevant. Because we can't change it. We can't change people's opinion. We can't make people want to do something different. And we don't know. So my issue with a lot of the political conversation is, okay, let's take I love the numbers. They're great to see. But in real life, what are you dealing with? And how do you respond to that? And if people are able to be honest about what they're experiencing and what needs to be done, I believe we'll spend the rest of time talking about what should be and what isn't, because we'd be on the way to what needs to be.
I wish that the political landscape at the national level would be like how it is with my limited understanding in Atlanta at the local level. I was just talking to my wife about it. So my wife and I, for those who don't know, my wife and I are at New York, but are in New York. We're from Atlanta. We plan on going back to Atlanta, but we both grew up in Atlanta our whole lives, and there's obviously political things going on in Atlanta, but I don't care about it. My wife doesn't care about it. Like when we were there, like things were fine. Like why
It's
do I need to
cool.
spend time like what's going on? And it's like, oh well, you know, you have to care about this problem or these people suffering over here. It's like, look, it's if that's your thing, then okay, cool. But you don't like just because it's a huge problem to you doesn't mean it's a huge problem to everyone. And I like that I like the way you laid it out. You said it's not only that people think that they're correct, but they then feel some sort of entitlement or even what's what I'm looking for, incentive, for lack of a better word, to impose their view onto you and to say, well, if you don't think like me, it's wrong, and uh I'm kind of rambling at this point. But yeah, when it comes to trying to keep this on topic, when it comes to the intersection of politics and the Black community, kind of like we've been saying, if that is where, now I'm talking to the Black community, if that's where you feel your acumen is, let's say in the political realm, in understanding human nature, in getting things done, and making deals, okay, cool. That's where you can go. But you can think of politics as one lever to try to get the desired result that you want for yourself, you and yours, or as well as the community. Like I mentioned before, the gentleman in Albany, that was a grassroots organization. And you could say that there's some here you have to define politics, right? Like I'm sure he had to get some sort of certifications to do certain things, and so he had to deal with government apparatus and whatnot. But that's not no, that's not that's not what we're talking about, right? So look, I think for most people, temperamentally, there are some things that are just going to bother them, and that's okay. That might mean that you have the motivation to do something about it, right? Because the fact that it bothers you and can grip your attention means that it's speaking to you. It's speaking to your nervous system. It's speaking to your being. We have another good mutual friend and fraternity brother, Meech, and he has devoted his entire life to civic law and helping the Black community. Like he went to law school. He's a great lawyer now. Like I'm like, oh, that's amazing. That's really different from someone who posts on social media one time to say how angry they are about something going on, right? And so that's kind of I guess that's a rule of thumb I would try to offer to someone. Like if you aren't willing to devote some portion of your life to developing your competency and your skills to solve that problem, it's probably not a problem you really care about.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing. Is like my way I say is you have to find what resonates with you, right? Like you said, like you don't really feel like if there's a problem in the world that just really grinds your gears, you probably should solve it. And when you solve it for yourself, and this is the thing, a lot of people don't want to solve that problem for themselves first. When you solve it for yourselves and you understand it well enough, you can also solve it for others. In astrology, this is called understanding Chiron, or being the wounded healer. So everybody comes into the world with a wound or something that aggravates them or something that needs to be made whole. And once you heal that wound, in the process of healing that wound, not only do you usually heal your trauma, but you usually find your gift as well. And so the idea of the wounded healer is that in order for you to know how to heal someone, you have to have healed yourself first. And so the concept here is that when you find something in the world that aggravates you, it's usually a mirror for something in yourself that you haven't accepted or haven't healed yet. And if you're able to find that, identify that, and heal that, this is how you find out what your medicine is as an individual and what you bring forth to the world. This is when we get into this whole idea of shamanic work and understanding healers and white workers and everything in that space. Realistically, what we're saying here is that the thing that's you're meant to be great at is probably going to be the thing that annoys you the most. And the time that you take not solving that is usually where your suffering starts. And once you figure out how to solve it, that's where your suffering ends and becomes a cycle of you perfecting that medicine that you found.
I think that's a great place to end it at, dog. That was great.
Definitely. I
That
mean,
was good.
I think that's the good point. Like even when we talk about the community, when we talk about the black community, what are we waiting on now? We're waiting for that medicine. We're waiting for that person that's actually disturbed enough by the problem to come up with the solution. We've seen a couple people. We've seen the MLKs. We've seen the Malcolm X's. But because it's a human-wide problem, it's going to take a solution that mm, I believe it has to be something that grows in the culture itself, not an individual. And it takes time to plant that seed.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Dog. Great conversation, man.
Definitely enjoyed the talk, man. Can't wait till we can get back on here again. I'm gonna cut up all the videos we got and come up with something a little dope to do with all that we have so far to kind of recap where we're at right now, and then we'll be ready for the next series when it comes around. You got anything to talk to the people on my side about?
I want to reiterate what you said, man. Just start small, start where you're at. There are some things, if you ask yourself, that would pop in your mind as problems that you could fix, that you would fix, that you should fix. And just try to do that every single day.
Definitely can. Appreciate it, boss. We can go ahead and cut this show here. I appreciate y'all for coming out. It's another episode Against the Narrative. Ciao.